Before we start the next video, a large thank you to Oyvind, Satya, Nope, and a language I am unable to read. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for the support. Hello guys, and sorry for the delay. It's been a very busy week for me, and to compensate for me being so busy, I'm going to release 2 videos this week instead of the 1. Okay, so let's go on in here and see what we're going to do today. So today we're going to be starting the inventory system, and we're actually going to make a basic template for our inventory's UI. So let's jump in. Alright, first I'm going to go to the player UI, make sure I'm in 2D view, and I'm going to create an empty game object. And then I'm going to call that empty game object HUD. This is where we're going to put our heads-up display components. I'm going to hit Alt here and make sure that's the size of the player UI's game object. I'm then going to unpack the player UI prefab, select all of these components, and drag them under the HUD. I have to unpack it to drag those components under there, or else it won't let me. I'm then going to replace my player UI prefab with this prefab, and I'm going to go down here and create another empty game object. Now, under this game object, I'm going to call it UI Windows, and this is going to house our inventory and all of our menus, etc., etc. Going to hit Alt and make that the same size as the game object as before. Going to create another empty game object here, and I am going to call this Select Window. So, this is going to be the menu we use to select which window we're opening. I am going to add an image to that, and I'm going to drag it down here. I'm then going to scale that to be the shape of like a rectangle, because in Souls, when you press start, you get this little rectangle menu that pops up, at least in Dark Souls 3, and then you can select your inventory, the options menu, or whatever you want to select. I'm going to make this, we'll make the height 40, and the width at 160 looks pretty good. Again, this is just prototyping, so don't worry too much about your dimensions. You can make them whatever you want. Going to make sure I got this color saved in my color swatches, and yes I do. So I'm just going to go and click here, go to my color, and hit our pre-selected color here so it matches all our other UI components. Okay, now I'm going to add a horizontal layout group. If you guys aren't familiar with what this thing does, I suggest you take a read of the documentation, but basically it organizes things in a horizontal line for us. So I'm going to add another empty game object here. I'm going to call this Select Equipment. This is going to be the button for our equipment screen. I'm going to add another empty game object. I'm going to call this Select Game Options. This will be for like quitting game, select game volume, etc., etc. Under Select Equipment, I'm going to change the width and height to 40. You guys can put it whatever you want. These are just arbitrary numbers. Going to do the same to the Select Game Options. Next, I'm going to go up to Select Equipment, and I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to add an image. And I'm going to do the same for Select Game Options. Okay, now if I drag my handy-dandy screen over here, you will see I have 2 icons. I will leave the links for these in the description. So these are just 2 working icons we're going to use for our equipment and our options. I'm going to click both of these, and where it says texture type, I'm going to change it to sprite, 2D, and UI, so I can use it for my UI. Okay, excellent. Next, I'm going to right click on select equipment. I'm going to say UI, and we're going to add a button. Now, I'm going to make the dimensions of the button 40 by 40, the same as the empty game object above. And I'm going to delete that text that's under there because we're not going to use that. Now I'm going to go to my Select Game Options empty game object and do the exact same thing. Making it 40 by 40. Going to delete the text again. So a lot of this video is just going to be setting up our actual UI, the imagery and whatnot. So on the button here, it says UI Sprite. I'm going to drag in the helmet icon, and I'm going to do the same thing down here, but with the gear icon. Now, this way our buttons have some design, and we can see roughly what they're for. Now, I'm going to change this to middle center under the horizontal layout group child alignment. This will make it lean towards the center of the game object instead of favoring the left. And before we move on, I am also going to add images to both of these. And what I'm going to do is go down here and click our UI color. So it looks like they have some kind of border. This is just for taste. This is not a necessity. Do the same thing here, so it gives a bit more definition. And we're actually going to create a third button. The button is actually going to be for our general inventory. Because in Dark Souls, you have your equipment screen, you have your options. So you have your equipment screen and you have your inventory screens, and they are separate. So first though, we're going to go to highlighted color. I'm going to make it so when we highlight this button, it's going to turn red. I'm also going to save that in my swatches. And on both of these buttons, I'm going to change the highlighted color to this bright red. That way, you're going to know when we're hovering our mouse over the button, it will be very clear. Alright, so on the select window here now, I'm just going to drag this down so it's more towards the bottom of the screen. I'm going to make it so it anchors to the bottom center of the screen. Cool. Now if we actually jump in game with this open, you see if I hover my mouse over the buttons, they turn red. Very clear indication that we are on whichever button. However, if we click them, nothing happens right now. So let's create an empty game object, and we're going to make one more button. We're going to call this one Select Inventory. I'm actually going to drag this up because I want this to be placed a bit higher on the chain. Nope, not under there, right there, so it appears first. The horizontal group will sort them by whatever you have first. So I'm going to add an image, put that as 40 by 40, and I'm going to change our image to our UI color. Then I'm going to add a button under it, just the same as the other two, exactly the same as the other two. Going to change that to 40 by 40. To make the highlighted color red. And I'm going to delete the text that's under it. So I actually have another image for this one as well. I'm going to pull back my handy dandy screen, and I have a bag icon, which is just a generalized inventory icon. Again, I will leave the links for these in the description if you guys want to use them, just for prototyping. Sprite and UI apply, and we're going to drag that icon onto here. So the idea is that when we open up the bag icon, we're going to open up our inventory. When we open up the helmet icon, we're going to open up our equipment changing screen. And the gear icon will be for game options like quick game, volume, etc., etc. So that looks really cool. I'm liking that a whole lot. So next we're going to go here under our UI windows, and we're going to make an empty game object. I'm going to call this left panel. And this is going to be housing basically our inventory and all of our equipment screen in the future. Because Dark Souls has 3 different panels, a left, center, and right. The left for your equipment and inventory, usually the right, I believe, depicts your stats, and the center is like item descriptions. So we're going to create an empty game object under this left panel. We're going to call this inventory window. Okay, and this is going to house our inventory. Going to do the same thing here, make it the size of our empty game object, as always, so it stays centered on our screen. Now, we're going to have to make a couple more game objects. I'm going to right click under this inventory window here. We're going to create an empty. I'm going to call this weapon item inventory. Okay, now we're going to do then. Now I'm going to create a UI image. And I'm going to call this UI background. And that's exactly what you think it is. It is just an image that will be the background of our inventory screen. So, you don't want to use that tool. When you're actually adjusting the sizes of UI, you want to use the width and height, never the scale. So I'm going to make mine, let's just say 500. That looks great. By 800 is a bit too big. We'll try 500 by 750. That looks perfect. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to actually change the color to match our other UI here. Whoops, there we go. Perfect. And I'm going to drag that over to the left side of the screen. And that looks wonderful. Excellent. Now keep in mind in the future when we open our inventory, we're going to be hiding our HUD. So that won't be in the background normally. So if you want, you can also just hide that right now. This is what it will look like when we open it. So now we're going to right click. We're going to create an empty game object. And we're going to call this inventory slot parent. And this is going to be the parent transform that our inventory slots are going to spawn on or instantiate on. So we're going to make this the same size as the background here because we want them to instantiate within this background. Perfect. That looks great. And now on top of this, we're going to add an empty game object. And then we're going to say inventory slot. Actually, we're going to say weapon inventory slot. Because Dark Souls handles their inventory with multiple inventory types. And the first one we will be creating is our weapon inventory. Next, we're going to say grid layout group right here. That way when we instantiate our slots, when we create them, they'll be organized in grid-like fashion. So on the weapon inventory slot, I'm going to create a button. And I am going to make that the same size as its empty game object. I'm going to delete the text again, as is tradition. On the button, I am going to go to the color over here. And we're going to make it our UI color. I am then going to go up here to the weapon inventory slot. Actually, I'm going to make another image below it, and then I'm going to call this icon, and this will be the image that changes depending on what item is in the inventory slot. I'm going to hide that for now or disable it because there is no item on the inventory slot. Then I'm going to go to spacing here. Actually, going to go to padding on the grid and make it look a bit more neat. I'm going to give it some padding on the left so it's not hugging the left side of the image. Can also do the same thing to the right, the top and the bottom. That looks pretty good. So what we can do then actually is if we actually duplicate this object, you'll see that it will actually organize in grid-like fashion. So let's do that. There we go. We're going to be duplicating it with a script depending on what items are in our inventory, but now we can actually see what it will look like. So I'm going to adjust this a bit more because I don't like how it's favoring the left side here. So I'm actually going to add some distance too, also between each of the inventory slots, so they're not touching. I'm then going to add some spacing, and that looks great. I think it needs to be a bit more shied away from the left side though, so that looks great. So 37 seems to be the sweet spot. I'm just going to try 35, now 40, now 37 definitely seems to be the sweet spot, so we're going back to 37. Okay, whoops, not 375. So now we can delete all these cloned objects. I was just showing that as a demonstration as to what it looked like, but make sure you keep one because we're going to actually clone that one inventory slot with a script, and we're going to make those inventory slots display item images depending on the items in your inventory, and that is the end game goal here. So let's finish connecting our UI. We're going to hide that window here now. Minimize this. What we want to do is make it so when we click the inventory button, select inventory, we want to open that inventory window. That's the goal here, and that's pretty straightforward. We're going to have the button. Go down here where it says on click and hit the plus icon. And then we're going to drag the inventory window, game object, into that empty box there, like so. And then we're going to go down here and click game object, and then click set active and check this box. Checking the box means it will become active. If you leave it unchecked, it means when you click it, it will become disabled. So now when we click that button, that window should pop up. All right, excellent. We're also going to want to click here, and we're going to want to drag our select window in here, because when we click on a button, we want to close this window that we've opened too. So we're going to drag select window in here, and we're going to click game object set active, and we're going to leave the box unticked. So when we click on that button now, it will close out the selection window and open the inventory window. Okay, cool. Now we need to make some kind of manager for our UI, and we're going to re-enable our HUD there momentarily. So on the player UI game object, let's create a script. I'm going to call mine UI manager. And this is going to manage opening and closing all of the windows depending on which options we select. It will also manage updating values and images and yada yada yada. This will be a system we build on over time, so right now it's going to be pretty bare bones. So I'm going to add my namespace here, which is Sebastian Graves, as is tradition. I am going to eradicate my start and update function. I'm going to say public game object, and I'm going to call this select window, because that's the name of the game object that our window selector is on. So let's go into here now and drag in our select window. Bit of advice, as I said before, I always try to name my variables the same thing as I name my game objects. So as you can see, look, select window is select window. Very easy to figure out where it goes. So we want to enable and disable this window via script. So let's do that. What we want to do now is go into our input handler and create a private void called handle inventory input. And you guys know where this is going. We're just going to create a button for our inventory, which will be start or escape on the keyboard. So I'm going to go up here and make a bool for inventory input. We're also going to need to make an inventory flag, which I will do momentarily after I create the functionality down here. Just going to copy and paste the jump input, replace it with inventory, and replace jump with inventory. We're going to need to go into our player controls again and set up a button, as we did before, or else we're going to get an error. So let's do that real quick. This error right here is just from us not having the inventory button, so let's set that up. Okay, so in player actions, I'm just going to duplicate one of the buttons here. Let's duplicate A. Let's go and put this above here, and we're going to call this inventory. Okay, and we're going to go and delete one of these buttons. We're going to delete the left mouse. We don't need that. and we're going to replace the button here. We're going to say start on the gamepad, and enter we're going to replace with escape on the keyboard. I'm going to close that out and save it. Excellent. Now that error should go away. And yes, it does. Okay, now back in here. Now we're going to make a function on our UI manager. We're going to call it public void open select window. Okay, and when we call this function, we're just going to open the window. So we're going to say select window.setActive is true. So when this function is called, just open up the selection window. We're going to save that. Back to the input handler over here. We're going to create a link to our UI manager. And on awake, we're going to say UI manager equals find object of type UI manager. So we're also going to essentially, when we hit the escape button now, or the start button on a controller, whichever you prefer, we're going to check and see if our inventory flag is called. And if it's not, we're going to activate it, and then we're going to open our inventory or our selection window. So let's go down here. First, let's add the inventory flag so we have a way to tell if our inventory is already open. Excellent. Okay, now down here. We are going to say if inventory input, we're going to say inventory flag equals the opposite of inventory flag. So if it's pressed, turn it off. If it's turned off, turn it on. And then we are going to say, within this same if statement, if inventory flag, we're going to say UI manager dot open select window. And now if the inventory flag is turned off, we want to make one for closing our window. So we're going to say public void close select window. There we go. Select window set active equals false. Very straightforward. So we're going to say else, because if there's no inventory flag, then it must be off. UI manager dot close select window. Excellent. Now we're going to have to call handle inventory input on our tick input function up here. Excellent. Now on the player manager, we're going to say input handler dot inventory input equals false. That way it's only called once per frame. Now if we press start and we press escape, you will see that our selector window opens. Press escape again and it will close. So let's press escape, open it, we click the inventory icon, and there is our inventory menu. In the next episode, we're actually going to hook it up to the items in our inventory via scripts, and we're going to fill it up and populate our inventory list with our items. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It does help appease the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you feel super generous, please check out my Patreon below. It does genuinely help me a whole lot. Now guys, the next few videos are going to be pretty long because this inventory system is like, it's honestly 60% setting up UI elements, which comes down to your preference. There are good practices for setting up UI elements, but there's no definite 100% perfect way to do it. It all comes down to where you like to place the windows, what taste you have. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that, and then the other 40% of the time will be coding and actually implementing it. So I hope you guys are all excited for that, and I will see you in the next episode, which should be out in just a couple of days. And after that, we are back to our regular viewing schedule. I'll see you guys in the next one.